Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Hey, I'm Greer, host of the Unfinished Idea podcast, mom to 2 boys and 2 dogs, and raising a child with additional needs. Our day-to-day experience isn't being talked about in everyday life, so let's start the conversation. Whether you're a parent, a friend, a teacher, or a neighbor, everyone is welcome to join us over a cup of coffee as we help bring awareness and better understanding about neurodiversity and families who are raising children with additional needs. We're here to share the joys, the struggles, and the differences, as well as learn and grow and feel seen and heard by how we interact with each other and the world. Welcome. Today, we are talking with Jeannie, who is the CEO of ADHD Wise UK, an organization that helps schools, parents, and families understand ADHD and, well, become wise about it. She was really fun to talk with and shared so much with us from her own personal experience, as well as what she has learned along the way. We dive straight into talking about those who are neurodivergent in the classroom, as well as wanting to raise kind humans. So here's my conversation with Jeannie. Today we have Jeannie with us, who is the kind of founder and CEO of ADHD Wise UK. Can you explain a little bit about ADHD Wise UK and what does it do?
So I used to be a teacher when I left teaching, when it got to a point where I couldn't change enough in the classroom and I was like, okay, what am I going to do? And I set up ADHD Wise UK when my children were diagnosed, and then I was diagnosed and I couldn't find the support that I needed. So because I was a teacher and a researcher, already more in autism at that stage, I started writing about what I found and what I was discovering in myself and in my children. So it started off as a Facebook page where I was kind of like a bit of a personal blog, and I was just information dumping. And it became so much more and quite quickly. And then in January 2019, it became my full-time job. And I coach and I train and I do specialist teacher consultancy. And I have a small team of people who do the same and similar.
And you talked about you were a teacher and kind of have that background. How did you find being a teacher and kind of knowing what the SEN SEND system is like? Like, did you struggle with that?
Well, I was very fortunate. I am very fortunate in that I trained, I did a university qualification that qualifies me as a SEN specialist. So I felt like I actually had a really good amount of input and exploration of things. And some of it was policy based, but mostly it was about practice. It was about how are you adapting practice to support differing needs. So for me, I think that I was very fortunate that I had that. And I always looked at every child in every situation very much as what do they need? So for me, yes, you have a curriculum to deliver, but I was always scanning the room for what my learners, what my students needed. Because rather than just, I take more of an andragogy approach than a pedagogy approach. So I'm very much about sort of empowering learners to want to learn. Because my brain, I can't learn anything unless I want to learn it. And that's very, very ADHD, very, very autistic too. And that's just everybody. Everybody benefits from learning things that they're interested in. But that is more so, particularly with ADHD. Much, much more so because we have an interest-based nervous system versus everybody else's nervous system that basically can attend to the urgent and the important, whereas an ADHD brain has to force itself to do that because it's interest-based by default rather than attending to needs default. So knowing that about myself, being very fortunate that I had the early exposure to andragogy versus pedagogy, I think was really beneficial because you literally are then at all times looking at the people before you. It's like, what do they need in order for them to learn rather than what do I need to teach them, how best to teach them. But you put the two together and you get this kind of like, I think, very effective combination. And I have a book, 100 Ideas for ADHD in Secondary Schools, which is a part of the Bloomsbury education. And I think that it sort of like, I hope it blends those things together so that it's not sort of like taking teachers too far away from how they were trained, but they can sort of step over and say, okay, well, there's this too, rather than I have to switch to this way now. No, you don't. But it's using hopefully what teachers know and then sort of like making that shift for learners with additional needs.
It sounds like you know, particularly that class gave them not just kind of like knowledge of, you know, for this example, like around the diagnoses, but also, like you said, lived experiences, and opened it up so people could kind of see like, oh, that's how it plays out in this person, but this person, it plays out differently. And so people can kind of, I can imagine they got a way better understanding of life and their own life from that kind of exercise. Like you said, you did it throughout the whole year because it really showed, I think, from what, I mean, I'm kind of like, oh, I might do this with my own kind of group, because it, like you said, it's that lived experience. People were sharing true examples, which is, I think, sometimes where the disconnect can be.
And if you're not asking young people, what are you doing? You're making assumptions. And I would advocate for not doing that. I would advocate for actually asking, having conversations and exploring that. But I think that's kind of, I had a coaching background from before I went into education. So I think I've kind of brought the coaching aspect into my teaching, and that sort of like self-exploration. Well, you know, don't expect, I don't know all the answers about what you mean. You do. And between us, we'll get there. So I think that the coaching actually impacted the teaching. And then I left teaching and ended up coaching, but specifically around neurodiversity. So it was just, life is funny, isn't it? So you take these tangents and these different things. Yeah. And my previous careers all sort of like dovetailed into what I do now. And I think that's fab. And I feel very, very fortunate and quite privileged, actually.
Yeah. Would you say, you just kind of mentioned how coaching probably helped you in teaching. Would you, and then kind of thinking about as well, the book that you've written and kind of combining the two kind of teaching styles together, would you say that a teacher should be more like a coach?
I think there's a difference. Because the classroom teaching, the bit where you're looking after your students, I mean, you're doing that anyway, but there's a difference between sort of like the classroom teaching and the subject teaching, and being available for young people on a pastoral level, even though you are their teacher, not their pastoral lead. But it's you've got to take pastoral approaches. And I've really been thinking about what the differences are between mainstream and alternative provisions. And actually the pedagogy versus the andragogy is a lot of what that difference is in that you have to go about things differently. You actually have to change what you're doing. And I kind of feel like explaining it that way, I'm hoping, because I'm delivering a session for an organisation later on today, and I'm exploring that, and I'm writing an article on it as well. But I'm hoping that those theoretical frameworks, I'm hoping that by talking about it, people can go, okay, we actually haven't got to rewrite the rules. We've just got to apply the rules that tend to be used in adult education, and realise that's the sort of like there's some lessons here in adult education that we can apply to mainstream education that will make it possible for more children, I believe, to stay in mainstream. I think that the fact that we've got so many children who are needing an alternative is because we've got this very rigid, this is what we will do in mainstream, and this is how children will behave in mainstream. This is what we'll accommodate. This is what we will accept. And you can be here if you are different, as long as you are suitably similar. Mm. And that's sort of where mainstream sits. And it's just like, well, actually, even if that's the way we stay, let's extend what we can, the amount of people that we can accommodate within mainstream by learning from andragogy, incorporating that alongside pedagogy. Then you'll have more children that are able to stay in mainstream school, is my belief. But I also think that it's terrible that those who need an alternative provision have to fail as mainstream. And I would just say, I know there's no video to this, but I've kind of like put fail in exclamation marks, because it's not the child that failed. Children don't fail at school, at mainstream school. It's that it wasn't the right placement for them. So I would call that school placement breakdown, for which the child tends to take the blame. Mm. And I think that we need to take blame out of those situations, because I think it's really, really important that we are actually kind of like looking at it and saying, this isn't the right place for this child to be. And when you look at what Send Law says, is that when a child has an identifiable need, the school has an obligation to meet that need. Or actually, in the wider world, they would say, actually, we can't. And that isn't about the child failing. It's not about the school failing. It's just a conversation and acknowledgement, and there is no blame. But unfortunately, everybody that I've ever worked with in alternative provision, particularly when I go into delivery training, etc., it's just like, the children that get into alternative provision have school-induced trauma. Typically, they have ACEs. And then I'm saying, please lean into your ACEs training, into your trauma-informed practice when you are accepting a new child into your school community. Because as a classroom teacher, as the person who did these things, not just the year group that I've talked about, but other year groups as well that I'd had a real sort of, connection with, they do tell you, they'll say, when I was in mainstream, this is what happened. And I was made to feel like this. And it took me a long time to trust the teachers that I'm with now.
Yeah.
Because of all of this.
Yeah, I know. I remember my son is 6, so he's much younger, but at nursery, I remember them saying constantly, oh, he's a problem child. He doesn't follow the like all these kind of negative labels. And me going like, yeah, but there's something about like, we were, trying to figure out not what was going on, but, just trying to figure out like his diagnosis, how we could help him. I mean, he was 3, so he was still just teeny weeny. But once we kind of got a more formal diagnosis, the labels like changed. And it's not about labels, but it was like, all of a sudden it was like, he wasn't a problem child. He was just a creative thinker. And I was like, but he's not really changed. Like, I mean, he's grown and matured, but like, he's not, I wouldn't have said he's changed, but yet the labels have. And I just think, hopefully he won't remember any of those words, but it was very traumatic for me as a mom to hear those things. And so I can only imagine if you're growing up with those, like you said, that, those kind of secondary older children would not trust the teacher.
No, they don't. And okay, so yes, talking just as a parent then, I've got 3 biological children who are a combination of autism and ADHD. And 2 out of the 3 received an awful lot of negative, the 20,000 additional negative messages that is quite commonly known. That's what happens up to the age of 10. The data to support that those 20,000 additional negative messages as a result of behaviours and traits and just ways of being, ways of existing. So you're saying about whether your child will remember them, probably they will. But as a parent, it's kind of like putting the bubble wrap around that by making sure they know better about themselves, isn't it? It's like that, sort of like making sure that you are as constructive and positive as you can be. I think it's dreadful, actually, what you've said there. Not that you've said it, but it's a dreadful fact of life that you've seen that the attitude changed when the diagnosis came through. Because by point of law and by point of being a really decent human being, support is supposed to be needs-based, not diagnosis-based. And it's not the child's fault or the child's responsibility or the parent's responsibility or the teacher's responsibility, actually, or fault, that there is such a delay in getting a diagnosis. And while there is those diagnoses, can we not just work out what the child needs and do that, point of law or not, because it is a point of law, but can we not do that? Because I think we should. I think we should be looking at children and thinking, what do they need? And as a parent, I look at my kids and I'm just like, I know they're impacted by the negative messages. I know I was too. Growing up, I can still remember those messages. So I'm not going to say to you, your child probably won't, because they probably will. But hopefully they're in the mix with the positives as well. And also because it's ended, that's going to be better. But I do think your child probably will remember. And I think that's awful. And I think that it doesn't need to be like that. We should be holding children in unconditional positive regard. It absolutely recognizing they were human beings, but our needs are not the responsibility of the children that we're supporting when we're professionals, and they're not the responsibility of our children when we're parenting. So it's hard though, and you're very human. But there is, I think, one of the things that really shocked me when teaching was that teachers felt like it was not a good idea to apologise to children, to acknowledge when they got it wrong, to allow them to see their own struggles. I took a completely different tact. And then when I was working 3 days a week with a particular group of students, my boss said to me one day, "Why is it I always kick off when you're not here?" And I was like, "I wonder." And it was that constant scanning for need. But I guess there are things in my own upbringing that kind of meant that I was always scanning for need anyway. So there are some aspects here that are inherent in me, I suppose. But I would also say that brings about some best practice stuff that I think is possibly helpful.
Yeah. We talk a lot about in our house about like modeling and just like, you know, modeling good behavior, modeling, you know, like you say, modeling apologizing. Like we apologize to our kids because we totally get it wrong. And but also modeling taking a break, you know, when we need to remove ourselves from the situation. Because our child is, well, both our children, but, you know, kids are watching all the time. Like they're watching parents, they're watching teachers, they're watching. And so if we're modeling good behavior, if we're modeling kind hand, you know, we say kind hands a lot in our house, those kinds of things, then they're going to take that in as well. And so I just wondered how, as a parent, how I could support, and I'm not saying teachers are not doing this, so don't hear me say that, but like, how can I support teachers to, I don't want to say model good behavior, because I think they are modeling good behavior, but hopefully, but you know, how can I guess my question is, how can I support teachers, you know, to kind of bring the best out of my child?
Yeah, I mean, there's only going to be so much you can do as a parent because you're the parent and they're the professional and they'll probably consider that they know what to do. But in answer to your question, if they're listening, and you won't always get every professional to listen because they're human and because, it's complicated. But it is around correction that comes from connection works. Correction that comes from criticism does not. Unless you're going to use shame, but we know shame is harmful. We know that it has a massive impact on mental health. And we have a crisis of mental health in our children, as well as in our adults, but that's another story. And so connection, curiosity. And curiosity doesn't really have an opinion. But one of the things, I mean, I sort of quite often with the young people I've worked with, it's been like, "Oh no, you're not in trouble, but I can't have you bouncing around my classroom like that because I have a lesson to teach. So let's work together to find solutions to this." And the kids look at you like, so it's in the language. It's about working with children. It's about them knowing that they matter to you. And on that note, it's like, I remember one student had an absolute meltdown and he'd thrown things and he was sat in a corner, hunched over and everything else. And I just sort of went and sat in a different part of the classroom, but near enough to him, but far enough away that I was safe, but close enough that he felt like we were connected. And he kind of like just mumbled, "I'm sorry, miss." And I was like, "It's okay. And I'm glad I'm getting to sit here with you now because you matter." And he looked at me, and I had a similar thing with my son as well, because I think we think the kids we're working with and our own kids know that they matter to us and that we've got them. No matter what, we've got them. And they don't necessarily know that. And I've had moments with that as a parent. I've had moments with that as a professional. So with regards to being a professional, it's like letting the kids know. And I mean explicitly saying, "Well, yeah, okay, this has happened and this is not ideal, but you matter to me. So let's take this time." Because that connection means that you can take a child on a journey. You've met them where they are, and then you can move them on.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Yeah, like I think you said a really key thing of like you advocated for your son in a respectful way to the teacher. And I think that's something I've learned I've had to do, like, and not because the teacher doesn't have my child's best interest, but just because I know my child. And like you've said, your child knows them the best and I can be that voice for them. And I think that's a really, like key thing is, doing it respectfully. I think that, the saying is, I think you get more bees with honey than with, kind of the idea of like, not positivity, but, respect and working together kind of attitude is better than criticizing and, kind of being on opposite sides. but advocating is such a big thing, and making sure that your child's voice is being heard either through you or them, is such a key thing.
Well, it's one of those things where as parents, we advocate for them until they can advocate for themselves. If you ever heard my other twin, Becca, speaking, you'd be like, oh my goodness, because the girl has got quite some voice. And when she speaks to parents and that they ask her, well, and professionals, what helped you the most? She said the fact that I knew that if I needed to, I could send in the mama bear and my mum would turn up and she would deal with the situation. And the fact that I knew that meant I was able to tackle things myself. And she said, I would go up to teachers and I would say, I feel like I've done something that has annoyed you because I don't feel like we're working well together. As a child, as a teenager, from about 15, she was able to do that. So, I was saying about sort of like modelling the behaviour. Yeah, she at 15, she was able to go to a teacher and say, I think we got off on the wrong foot. And then the teachers would tell me this in a parents' evening, and they were like, I've never had a student speak to me like that. And because she does, the other children do as well. And it's like, okay, what does that tell you?
That's really, really quite bold for her to go up and do that. But at the same time, like you said, she's seen it modeled. She knows she has, she has support, and she knows that that's what's going to get her what she needs. Not that it's all about her, but it's that kind of, she knows if I go this way, I'm going to actually get what I want, versus if I go in more aggressively or, whatever, like bad behavior, I'm probably not going to get. So that's really good.
Becca would say to you if she was sat here now, I also learned from what was going on with my brother and my sister, because they've got their older sister, Vicky. And Vicky got a much harder time with it, and Will got a much harder time. And Becca saw that. She saw that, and she masked massively her autism and her ADHD to such an extent that she developed an anxiety disorder, which was probably a secondary as a result of unmet needs. She masked to such an extent. Sometimes I hear parents speak about their children with neurodevelopmental differences, and it's almost like they're not ambitious for them, or they're so worried about what's coming. And I like sharing the examples of Will and Becca in particular, because it does give that sort of hope. But then I would also share Vicky's story, because Vicky's 31, has a very, very different life. It doesn't have the same cognitive abilities and the processing abilities. She's never going to work full time, but she absolutely could work part time. And it's just finding that sort of like right slot for her, that way of being where she can be appropriately supported. But for her, what does success look like? It doesn't necessarily mean working full time with a degree. Sometimes it means volunteering, and sometimes it means being a part of a family, being the joy of the family, because Vicky is completely joyous. She's just like this sort of quite sparkly unicorn. She wears cat ears every day, and she's just a pleasure to have around. And if you value people by their productivity, then you don't value Vicky. But that's not the measure. The measure is she a good person? Yes, she is. Would she do anything for you that was within her capacity? Yes, she would. And I'm immensely proud of that as well. And for me, that's what success looks like. Being a decent human being who does what they can for other people.
Yeah.
That's who she is.
Yeah. We say that in our house. We want to raise kind humans. That's what we want to raise, is kind humans. And if that means that they, are the next Bill Gates, great. If that means that they are volunteering at a cafe every day, great. Like, that is whatever they can do and achieve, great. But as long as they're kind about it, that's a win.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a workaholic. I'm not very good at putting the work down. I get special interest, hyper focus on it, and I can lose myself in it. And Vicky will come and bring me a cup of coffee, and she'll bring me avocado on toast, and she'll say, "Can I go? Shall I go walk the dogs, Mum?" And things like that. And it's just that sort of absolute kindness. And she's just like, "Are you okay?" Because I'm sitting there and I'm working, and she's just like, "Oh, go and do that for Mum." That's a nice person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'll be on a coaching call with somebody, and I'm just like, my daughter's just brought me a sandwich and a cuppa, and they're like, wow, I wish my daughter would do that. And it's like, she's just a beautiful human.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one of the questions you sort of like asked me before, was around the sort of like what strengths I think neurodivergent people bring to the table. in Vicky's case, that's what she brings.
Yeah.
Kindness. She's a ray of sunshine.
Yeah.
She's just a beautiful human. So
that's really, a very, you have seen a lot of different people, different people with different needs. And I'm sure you've seen lots of positive and negative, but to get to see that in your kids, I think is, I don't know, as a mum, I think that's really special.
One though, because it's also true. And I think one of the hard lessons to learn is that not every neurodivergent person is a good person. You can be autistic, ADHD, etc., and still be not very nice.
Yes.
and that's okay, because it's part of being human, because good people do not so good things and not so good people do good things, because it's not, we tend to sort of like polarize these things. But I think there is, particularly within the autistic community, this belief that if another person is also neurodivergent, that they must be a good person. And that's not necessarily true. And even if it is true, it doesn't mean they're good all the time, because that's not how it works.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that we don't tell our children enough, whether we're working with them as professionals or whether they are our children, is that relationships end and they change. That's okay. You can end them and change them too. You just have to stay decent. The only thing we owe anybody is decency. I don't think we tell children that enough. I wish we did.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that they giving them permission to end things as well. Because I think, I don't know, I've read quite a bit about how often neurodivergent children struggle with relationships. And so I was chatting with a friend and we were kind of talking about we were a little worried about friendships for them when they're older, but actually giving them permission to say actually I don't, I want to change that relationship, or in that relationship, for whatever reason, is also okay. We don't need to hold on to that just so that they have a friend.
Well, I mean, it leaves them incredibly vulnerable to abusive relationships, doesn't it? And unfortunately, that is something that we have experienced and had to learn from. Children do not need to hold on to a friendship to such an extent that they sacrifice who they are for it.
Yeah.
The only thing they owe anybody is decency, and the only thing anybody owes them is decency. I think it's a really, really healthy lesson to give young people.
Yeah. Yeah.
That relationships can and do end, and that's okay. And they change, and that's okay. You can change them and you can end them too.
Yeah. Tyler Perry, he's a famous actor who is in America, is very weird. But there's a big kind of quote that he did, and it's, that idea that friendships, for anyone, there are seasonal friends and then there are lifetime friends. And sometimes we can get them mixed up. And that idea that there are, friends who come into our life for a season and for a reason. And it's okay that we are no longer friends with them, and it's not to say that they can't be friends in the future or that they're bad people or we're bad people. It's just that there are friends for a season and then there's friends for a lifetime. And we just have to kind of shift that. And I don't know, that's a really good thing. That's for anyone. That's not just for, adults. I kind of, as I read that, I thought, that's a really good thing for an adult, but that's for anyone. That's for children as well. There are friends for seasons.
Yeah. And I think the other thing there is that we, particularly in sort of the literal thinking around autism is that, just because a relationship ended doesn't mean it wasn't real. Just because a friendship ended doesn't mean you didn't genuinely love them and they didn't genuinely love you at that stage. Because these things are much more fluid than you're going to be my friend forever. And you can think that at the time, and your affection for that person and that person's affection for you at that time is real and genuine and whole and complete. It doesn't mean it's meant to last forever. And I wish we talked about that more with our young people, particularly our autistic young people, actually, because I think that is incredibly important, because it's well, it wasn't real then, it was all a lie. No. It was real. It's just that they're the season, like you put it. It's an interesting one, isn't it? And we don't talk about it enough, and I think we should talk about it more.
Yeah. That's I'm going to have to think about that more and think about how I can do that. My final question I have is, what would you've experienced lots of different people and children who are neurodivergent. And what would you want the world to know about neurodiverse people?
Different is good. We're supposed to be here. We bring different things to the table. I am angry about so many things. We're supposed to feel all the feelings that we feel. I am an angry neurodivergent person. It's just I've learned how to channel the anger. It is that we are supposed to be here. We're not errors of genetics. We don't need to be cured. We don't need to be prevented. We don't need to be treated. We actually need to be liberated to be ourselves. Our best self, yes, but ourselves. You know, that we're supposed to be here. We're not deficit. We're not disordered. We might be different, but diversity and difference is good. So I think that's what I would want people to know. I know that I have my place in the world. I know that my emotional dysregulation that comes as part of ADHD is useful.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Jeannie, for being with us and for sharing. This has been a really good conversation, and I have a lot of things I'm going to walk away from and think about. So thank you very much.
You're totally welcome. Thank you for having me.
An idea to finish on: stimming. Repetitive self-stimulatory behaviors. Stimming can include rocking, whistling, flapping, fidgeting, crackling knuckles, singing, and much more. It can involve any of the senses. It is a way of regulating and often helps focus. A point to ponder on. How does stimming benefit you? And how does it feel when you stim? Did you know we do a bi-weekly, meaning every other week, newsletter? It has information about the podcast, some helpful resources, and a point to ponder on. Sign up using the link below in the show notes. Also, I want to give a special thank you to Amy Peters, who's the creator of the NeuroCards. They are what we use for the point to ponder on. If you'd like to get your own set, follow the link down in the show notes.